Before we get into real Houdini FX, there's something studios always set up first, and beginners usually skip it. Most beginners don't really bother with folder structure, and that's totally normal. When you're learning Houdini, you just want to make smoke, explosions, and cool effects. But this boring setup stuff? This is exactly how studios work. Before any FX work starts, projects are organized. Folders, paths, and naming. Not because it looks nice, but because without this, things break very quickly. Every studio has its own structure, but the logic behind it is always the same. Now let's create the single folder studios use as the backbone of the entire project. Before opening Houdini, always create a main project folder. I keep it generic and simply call it Project. This folder represents the entire production: assets, shots, caches, scripts, everything. Nothing lives outside this folder. Later, inside Houdini, this folder becomes your JOB path, and studios rely on it heavily. If your JOB folder is clean, moving projects become safe and predictable. Skipping this step is one of the fastest ways to break paths later. Now let's see what actually goes inside that folder. Inside Project, I start by creating an Assets folder. This is for reusable elements like vehicles, props, or models. Assets are often organized further, and each one usually keeps its source files and textures together. Next, I create an HDA folder. HDA stands for Houdini Digital Asset, sometimes also called an OTL. This is where you keep custom tools, like reusable smoke setups or FX helpers you don't want to rebuild again and again. Then I add a geo folder for shared geometry exports, such as optimized alembics used in multiple shots. I also create a text folder for textures, image maps, HDRIs, and shared texture data. Keeping textures in one place avoids broken paths later. I also keep scripts for automation and presentations for previews or breakdowns. The most important folder here is Shots, because this is where all production work happens. We'll go inside the Shots folder and break down scene versus shot. A scene is the full event. For example, a missile launching from a jet and hitting a building. That entire sequence is one scene. The shots are the individual moments of that event. One shot shows the missile launching, another shows the impact, and another shows the result from a different angle. Different shots, same scene. In production, each shot gets its own folder. For example, SC001_SH0001, where SC means scene and SH means shot. This might look like overkill for personal projects, but it's a really good habit to build early. This separation is what makes large projects manageable and scalable. Now let's open one shot and see how studios organize the core work. Think of each shot as a mini project. Inside the shot folder, we split things by department. First, the FX folder. This is where Houdini HIP files live. This is where we actually build the FX. Then there's the Geo folder. This is mainly for simulation caches and geometry outputs. Caches should never live next to HIP files. They belong inside the shot structure and are always versioned. This lets you update your HIP file without breaking old simulations. This is how studios keep projects stable over time. Caches can get very heavy, so keeping them organized saves both disk space and time. We'll configure this properly later inside Houdini. Continuing inside the shot folder, let's look at the supporting folders. First, there's a cameras folder. All camera files for this shot live here. Then, there's a ref folder. This is for any image or video reference related to the shot. Next, the comp folder for compositing work, and a pre-comp folder for intermediate passes. There's also an output folder for temporary exports or handoff files. And finally, the render folder. As the name suggests, this is where shot renders go. Everything related to this shot lives in one place. This structure might feel like overkill at first, but it saves a lot of pain as projects grow. Now let's open Houdini and actually see how studios handle paths in practice. First, go to File, Set Project, and select your Project folder. The moment you do this, Houdini sets the job path automatically. Now go to Edit, Aliases and Variables, open the Variables tab, and scroll down. You'll see Job listed there. Job defines the entire project, not just a single file. This is exactly how studios keep projects portable, so they can move between machines or drives without anything breaking. Now let's talk about the HIP path. The HIP path refers to the location of the current Houdini.hip file, in other words, the active Houdini session. Each shot has its own separate HIP file. Think of it like this. Job is the whole project or scene containing multiple shots. HIP is a single shot inside that project. In Houdini, the HIP path is automatically defined based on where your .hip file is saved. We can also define or view it in the variable settings. In our workflow, we keep all HIP files inside the FX folder that we created earlier. Now that we know where HIP files live, let's talk about naming convention. Ever come back to a Houdini project after a few days and think, why do I have 5 final files and none of them feel final? That's a naming issue. To fix this, always use a proper naming pattern when saving your Houdini.hip files. Let me show you how studios do it. They use this pattern: scene, shot, department, description, version. So instead of final_v2, they save something like sc001_sh0001 etfx missile impact v0.hip. Here's how to read it. SC001 means scene 1. SH0001 means shot 1. FX tells you the department. Missile impact is the shot description. And V001.hip is the version number. Just by reading the name, you know what it is, where it belongs, and what it's for. So now let's talk about protecting your work. Rule number 1, always version up. Rule number 2, enable backups in Houdini. On your screen, go to the Edit menu, then Preferences, then Save and Load. This is where Houdini quietly saves you from yourself. I'm not going through every option, they're pretty obvious, but the golden rule is simple. Whatever settings you choose here, never overwrite files. Because overwriting feels fine, right until it isn't. Versions are cheap. Losing work isn't. Next up, I'll show you how to use Labs File Cache to automatically organize your cache paths. Studios don't give random names to their simulation cache files. Instead, they configure the Labs File Cache to name everything automatically. Let me show you how. So watch this. I drop down a Labs File Cache. Nothing fancy yet, just focus on the base name field. I right-click, go to Expression Arrow Edit Expression, switch to Python, paste in a small script, and boom! It automatically pulls the name from the parent geometry container it's connected to. No manual typing, no naming mistakes, no broken caches later. And if multiple Labs File Cache nodes exist in the same container, it handles duplicate names by automatically incrementing the suffix. Once naming is locked, the next logical step is making sure every cache goes to the right place. Let's do that now. Once the job path is set, focus on the base folder field in the Labs File Cache. Right-click, choose Expression, switch to Python, paste in a small script, and boom! It automatically detects the job path and builds a clean, shot-based cache directory. Instead of random folders everywhere, every cache lands exactly where it should, inside the geo folder of the shot directory we created earlier. This is how large projects stay organized, especially when simulations start piling up. Once this is set, you stop thinking about paths. You just cache and keep working. Now that paths are organized, the next problem studios solve is version safety, making sure nothing ever gets overwritten. Let's handle that next. When Houdini projects scale, version mistakes get expensive. That's why studios build version safety directly into the Labs File Cache, so nothing gets overwritten by accident. Let me show you. Select the Labs File Cache, go to the Advanced tab, and expand Scripts. Focus on the pre-render script field. Switch to Python, paste in a small script, and that's it. Before anything is written to disk, it checks the HIP file version. If a version exists, the cache is validated to match it. So instead of overwriting files or mixing FX versions, every cache stays tied to the correct scene version. This is how large productions stay safe as iterations stack up. Once this is set, you stop worrying about versions. You just simulate and keep moving. At this point, everything works. But configuring the lab's file cache every time gets annoying. That's why studios don't redo this setup repeatedly. They save it. So let's see how studios save this setup for reuse. The first option is doing it manually. Set your Python code in base name, base folder, and pre-render script. Then click the gear icon on the parameter pane, choose Legacy Preset, and save it. This gives full control, but it does require scripting knowledge. The second option is setting it as a default. Again, open the gear icon, choose Legacy Preset, and save it as the permanent default. I don't recommend this if you want flexibility. It's easy to forget, and caches can end up in the wrong place. Both methods work, it just depends on how hands-on you want to be. But this still isn't how most studios prefer to work. There's a faster, cleaner approach. Instead of repeating all that setup, you use a one-step Python shelf tool. You can get the script from the Gumroad link in the description. Copy the script, then go to your shelf. You can use an existing shelf or create a new one. Right-click on the shelf and choose New Tool. Give it a name and label. Mine is Cache Setup. Now go to the Script tab, paste the code, and hit Accept. From now on, whenever you need a lab's file cache configured, just drop the node, select it, and click the Shelf tool. One click and the base name, base folder, and pre-render script are set instantly. No manual setup, no repeated work, no Python headaches. At least not for you. This is how studios keep workflows fast and consistent. Every studio configures this node to match their pipeline. This is mine. You can copy the code into a shelf tool and modify it to match your own workflow, or use it as it is. If you have any questions, leave a comment and I'll clarify. Subscribe for more studio-style Houdini workflows.